Hello, everyone, and welcome to Veil of Shadows. I know many of you use these videos to relax and drift off to sleep. So before you let your mind wander into the world of dreams, I'd love if you could take a moment to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. It's always fascinating to hear from listeners all around the world. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps the channel grow and allows me to bring you more spine-chilling stories.
The Forgotten Graveyard. Nestled deep in the woods, where even sunlight hesitated to intrude, lay a forgotten graveyard. Overgrown with weeds and shrouded in a perpetual mist, it was the kind of place that no one stumbled upon by accident, or so the locals believed. Lena and her friends, city dwellers desperate for a weekend getaway, had rented a cabin just on the edge of these woods. The cabin owner, an older man with a weathered face, had given them one piece of advice before handing over the keys. Stay on the marked trails, no detours, no exploring. His tone was serious, almost pleading, but Lena and her friends brushed it off as a typical warning meant to keep tourists out of trouble. On their second day, Lena noticed a faint, unmarked path branching off from the main trail. She was the adventurous one of the group, always seeking something unique to post on her travel blog. "I think it leads somewhere," Lena called to her friends, her voice tinged with excitement. Reluctantly, her friends followed. Jake, her boyfriend, trailed behind her, muttering about getting lost. Sarah and Ben, the other two in their group, exchanged uneasy glances, but didn't want to seem like killjoys. The deeper they ventured, the more unsettling the forest became. The vibrant greens of the trees faded into muted grays. The air grew colder, carrying with it a faint metallic scent. The usual sounds of the forest, birdsong, rustling leaves, vanished, replaced by an oppressive silence. Their footsteps seemed to echo unnaturally, as though the forest itself was amplifying the sound. After what felt like an eternity, they arrived at the graveyard. The headstones were ancient, their inscriptions worn away by time. Some stood crooked, leaning precariously, while others had toppled completely. Moss and ivy choked the ground, and in the center of it all stood an enormous tree, its gnarled roots sprawling over several graves. Lena gasped, her unease momentarily replaced by awe. "This is incredible," she whispered, pulling out her camera to snap photos. But then she noticed something odd. The tree appeared to be bleeding. A dark red liquid seeped from a crack in its bark, pooling at its base. "What is that?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. Jake stepped closer, squinting at the liquid. "Sap, probably. Trees do that, right?" Ben, ever the skeptic, laughed nervously. "It's just a creepy old tree. Let's head back." But Lena wasn't ready to leave. Something about the place intrigued her, despite the growing unease in her chest. She circled the tree, taking more photos. That's when she noticed the carvings, names etched into the bark in jagged, almost frantic handwriting. Some of the names were partially obscured by the sap, but one stood out. Lena. Her breath caught. "Guys," she called, her voice trembling. "Look at this!" Before they could respond, the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the forest into shadow. The transition was so sudden it felt unnatural, as though the light had been stolen rather than set. Shadows stretched longer, and the mist thickened, curling around their ankles like cold fingers. "We need to leave, now," Jake said, his voice tight. They turned back toward the path they'd come from, but it was gone. Where there had been a faint trail, there was now only dense undergrowth. Panic set in as they stumbled through the woods, the beam of their flashlights barely penetrating the fog. No matter which direction they went, they always ended up back at the graveyard. "This can't be happening," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "We didn't walk in circles." "Maybe it's a trick of the forest," Ben offered, though he didn't sound convinced. And then the whispers began. Faint at first, like the rustling of leaves, but soon they grew distinct. "Leave. This place. You don't belong." The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing in the stillness. "Who's there?" Sarah shouted, her voice trembling. The only response was a low, guttural laugh that sent shivers down their spines. Lena's phone buzzed in her pocket. Relief washed over her. Maybe they had service after all. But when she checked her phone, her heart stopped. The screen displayed a photo she hadn't taken. It was of their group, standing by the bleeding tree. But in the photo, their faces were replaced by skulls, and shadowy figures loomed behind them. "What the hell is this?" Lena whispered, showing the photo to the others. Before anyone could answer, they saw movement among the graves. Shadows emerged, vaguely human, but grotesquely distorted. Their limbs bent at unnatural angles, and their hollow eye sockets glowed faintly. The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they became an unbearable cacophony. The air felt heavy, suffocating, and the shadows grew closer with each passing second. Desperation took over. "We're sorry!" Lena screamed, tears streaming down her face. "We didn't mean to disturb anything."
The shadows paused, their glowing eyes fixed on the group. The whispers stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. Then, slowly, the figures retreated into the mist, dissolving as though they had never been there. The group stood frozen, their breath shallow and ragged. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, they stumbled out of the woods, exhausted and shaken. The graveyard was nowhere to be found, as though it had been swallowed by the forest. They packed their belongings in silence, each of them haunted by what they had seen. But as Lena zipped up her bag, she noticed something tucked into the side pocket. A single red leaf from the bleeding tree. She picked it up, her breath catching as she turned it over. Etched into the leaf, in the same jagged handwriting as the names on the tree, was her name, Lena. She dropped it, her hands trembling. Deep down, she knew the graveyard wasn't finished with her. And when she looked into the mirror that night, just before she turned off the lights, she swore she saw one of those glowing eyes staring back at her from the shadows of her room. Moral: some places are lost for a reason, and curiosity can awaken what should remain at rest.